So what is the Russian Revolution? In summary, Nicholas II became Tsar of Russia in 1986, after Alexander II, his grandfather, was assassinated, and Alexander III, his father, died from kidney disease. Nicholas was the trigger to the Russian Revolution, as shown in his actions in Bloody Sunday, which was an event where a diplomatic solution attempted to form, but Nicholas's troops brought it down with gunfire. In response, workers, peasants, and some military forces began to rebel against the Tsar. As a solution, Nicholas created the Duma, a political body that works similarly to the House of Congress in America. There, they created the October Manifesto, another diplomatic solution to fulfill the people's needs. Unfortunately, its effectiveness was short-lived due to Nicholas rewriting the parliament to make it ineffective. As a result, Vladimir Lenin, a politician, attempted to reform the country using the ideas of communism. For Russians, communism was paradise. People weren't exploited, and they were all treated equally. Everyone was paid a good amount, and jobs were plentiful. No one had unmatched power, so they didn't wreck the country. Many people debated whether communism was more well-suited for Russia instead of authoritarianism.
Throughout history, revolutions have changed, corrupted, and dismantled nations. However, many of these revolutions helped improve the state, economy, government, and overall conditions of these nations. The Russian Revolution is a good example of this type of revolution, as its end result ultimately helped improve Russia. The Russian Revolution began in 1917 as an effect of the unjust political and social conditions that the people of Russia were facing. The first glimpses of these problems began in 1896, when Nicholas II became Tsar after the unexpected death of his father, Alexander III. Nicholas II wasn't trained or even inclined to rule, and as an effect, he ruled recklessly and inconsiderately, which led to the collapse of Russia and contributed heavily to the commencement of the Russian Revolution. The first signs of his recklessness were seen with the Kodinka tragedy, which occurred in 1896 as an effect of an assembly held by Nicholas to celebrate his coronation. Free food and drinks were offered to anyone who came, but as supplies were limited, many were killed when a crowd stampede occurred, leaving around 1,500 people dead. This event showed the first signs of Nicholas's bad leadership and lack of consideration, as with only a little more organization, the tragedy could have been avoided completely. More of Nicholas's reckless actions included refusal in reducing his absolute power and alienating minorities. On top of this, Nicholas made no attempt to improve the conditions of his country, making no effort to restore the economy, ignoring suggestions from the people of how to improve the government, and avoiding learning how to rule. Another sign of his inefficient rule was the Russo-Japanese War, when Nicholas sought expansion in the Far East. Nicholas felt that if Russia won against Japan, it would turn the people over to his side. However, Japan had been secretly militarizing the whole time, and was reckoned to be a dangerous force. Even so, Nicholas proclaimed war against Japan, thinking that it would be easy. Unexpectedly, Japan was fierce in the Battle of Port Arthur, when they unleashed a surprise attack on Russia's port and won the battle. When the Russian people heard the news, they were outraged over the victory. Over time, Japan had won numerous battles, such as the Battle of Mukden and the Battle of Tsushima. In the end, the Treaty of Portsmouth was created to end the war. Russia was exhausted, the people were at unrest, and Russia's supplies were all exercised during the war. Japan had claimed several territories given away from Russia as part of the treaty. How could a small country defeat a massive European country? In consequence, the people of Russia believed that Nicholas was not suited enough to rule. Lastly was an event dubbed Bloody Sunday, which was the true spark that ignited the flame that we know today as the Russian Revolution. Father Gapone, a priest, led a crowd of people towards the Winter Palace, where Nicholas II dwelled. Soldiers recognized them and thought this was a violent protest. However, it was simply a peaceful march. In his hands was the authority to make the decisions for the people, such as better working conditions, better working hours, equal rights, and medical aid. But the soldiers refused this and opened fire at the crowd. An official death toll was set at 96 persons dead, but estimations of actual casualties are around 4,000 dead. Victims that were at the event stated that they witnessed soldiers taking dead bodies away to nullify the amount of people that were believed to have died. Although Nicholas was not at fault for declaring this massacre, he received the blame for not being able to control his military during the disaster. All of these decisions led to the debate of the people to decide whether to remove the Tsar or not, which is significant in showing the diplomatic and social gap between the Tsar and the people. In an attempt to find a diplomatic solution, decades of the Russian people's debates sparked the revolution.
The three events we had shown led up to the Russian Revolution of 1905. Riots and strikes went around Russia, workers became agitated at their payment and treatment, peasants were furious at their lack of rations. But the peasants were also not the only ones who starved, but so were the military units, and even some sailors began to mutiny against their generals for the poor quality of food they received. All of these people wanted to reform and change so that they could live a better life. Things escalated at a fast rate, so Nicholas had two choices: to kill the people using the military, or give the people what they wanted. Since the soldiers began to disobey their orders, Nicholas was forced to give the people what they wanted. In order to satisfy them, he shared his power to the State Duma, a political body that determines if laws take effect or not, similar to our House of Congress. The weakness of the Duma is that the Tsar could veto any legislation and take down any meeting it holds, rendering it useless. After the October Manifesto was created, which served as rights that protected the citizens and reinforced the Duma's power, the October Manifesto was another diplomatic solution to fulfill the people's needs. Nevertheless, it was short-lived. Nicholas rewrote the October Manifesto so that it wouldn't restrain his power. He called back his soldiers from the Russo-Japanese War to arrest and execute members of the Duma. The State Duma and the October Manifesto was just a decoy so that Nicholas could regain his power. Nicholas' poor decision-making did not stop there. In 1906, laws were publicized that limited the Tsar's power, which later helped sway his overthrow in 1917. And so began the Russian Revolution of 1917, or the February Revolution. On International Women's Day, crowds of men gathered on the streets to strike against the Tsarist government, debating for change. But not only the women wanted change, but so did the men. Over time, enormous crowds gathered over all Russia, going against the Tsar's reign. Many signs were held up with some displaying the words, "Down with the Tsar." Although soldiers came out and were ordered to terminate the crowds, they were against their orders and also joined the debate. After all the protests went to Petrograd and began rioting, Nicholas had just lost his control of the capital city. With the people and military no longer on his side and him still leading the war, Nicholas was out of options. Multiple generals suggested that he should abdicate because that's what the people wanted, but Nicholas was worried about who would be in control after. Since time was not in his favor, Nicholas abdicated on March 15th, 1917.
Shortly after the revolution in 1917, many changes became prevalent in society. Communities were beginning to rebuild their economies and structures. Conditions for the average Russian peasant began to slowly improve over time. Although most inhabitants were left in deep poverty post-revolution, conditions were vastly improved versus pre-revolution Tsarist rule. The revolution had many short-term effects on both the people of Russia and on Russia itself. The first and biggest change that occurred was the change from Tsarism to communism. From 1917 to 1920, there was a civil war in Russia between the Bolsheviks, also known as the Red Army, and the anti-Bolsheviks, the White Army. The Bolsheviks were a Marxist party founded by Vladimir Lenin, a politician who during the rule of Nicholas tried to find diplomatic solutions to the unjust government. The Bolsheviks were founded in 1903, but came into power after the revolution in an attempt to reform the government. The anti-Bolsheviks were Russia's socialists and liberals who supported the autocracy. They disagreed with the ideals of Bolsheviks and preferred to keep the country the way it was. This disagreement caused the Russian Civil War, which lasted from 1917 to 1920. In the end, the Bolsheviks were victorious, and they gave birth to a new nation, the USSR, which stands for the United Soviet Socialist Republic, or the Soviet Union.
How did the Russian Revolution affect your family?
У моих прадедушек и прабабушек был большой дом, который их выселили из этого дома. Им пришлось уехать в другое место. В этом доме потом была школа. У них были, у других дедушек и прабабушек фабрики были, заводы были небольшие, но это все равно все забрала советская власть во время революции. И им пришлось полностью изменить свою жизнь, и они стали очень бедными и несчастными.
This is the translation. My great-grandparents were very wealthy. They were very rich. They had a big house, they had horses, had stables, and a factory. During the Russian Revolution, the Soviet government seized everything they had. They turned their home into a school, and they were left with nothing. They became very poor and very miserable. And my great-grandpa could not bear to see what was happening, so he unfortunately died from what happened to them.
Revolutions have changed nations for both better and worse. In the case of the Russian Revolution, Russia was affected in both ways. The people of Russia debated against the government, attempting to find diplomatic solutions towards it. The battle was long, hard-fought, and filled with struggles, but Russia's citizens persevered and came out on top. However, the people's victory came with a price. During the times of the revolution, many people died, putting their lives on the line in order to give their country a new future. The revolution came with a cost, but the sacrifices that were made were not in vain. The Russian Revolution carved Russia into a new country and led it to where it is today.